The rain hammered against the pavement as Shu Qing dashed toward his apartment complex. He burst through the entrance and froze at the sight of a girl standing in the dim light. She was dressed in elaborate ancient robes that looked far too authentic for a simple cosplayer. As he stepped closer, the girl leaped back with the grace of a startled predator. Thinking she was just a dedicated fan, he ignored her and headed up to his room. "Hold up!" Her voice rang out from behind him, sharp and authoritative. He paused and awkwardly mentioned that this was his home. The girl kept her distance, watching him like he was a dangerous criminal. He went inside, stripped off his soaked clothes, and prepared a meal for his cat, Winter Melon. Curiosity eventually won out, and he checked the peephole to see if she was still there. When he opened the door, she appeared instantly as if waiting for him. He offered her an umbrella, but she stared at the folding mechanism as if it were alien technology. "I am of the Yan clan," she introduced herself with a bewildered look. Seeing she had nowhere else to go, he sighed and motioned for her to come inside. As a TV ad started playing, Jiang Hai suddenly drew her blade and sliced the screen in half. She believed the people inside the glass box were trapped souls that needed to be freed. Shu Qing stood frozen, staring at his ruined television in total disbelief. Her bloodshot eyes turned toward him, searching for more dark magic in the room. He asked her where she came from, but her answers made no sense in the modern world. He raised his hands, desperately trying to get her to put the sword away. She revealed her name was Jiang Hai, a disciple of the prestigious Yan clan. Shu Qing wondered if her clan was wealthy enough to pay for his broken TV. She was offended that he didn't recognize the most famous clan in the empire. Realizing she was lost, he asked if she knew the city of Jiangcheng. Her silence confirmed his growing fear that she was truly from another time. She mentioned the 16th year of Kaiyuan, a period from the Tang Dynasty. He confirmed that the emperor she spoke of had been dead for over a millennium. Her eyes lit up when he spoke names she recognized from her own era. He joked that she could only find those people in a mobile game now. A sudden knock from a delivery man made her grab her sword once more. He rushed over to stop her, explaining it was just food being delivered. She watched in awe as he accepted the paper bag from the stranger. Jiang Hai wondered why all the men here had such short hair like exiles. Shu Qing feared she might have already attacked someone before finding his place. Her eyes fixated on the meat and veggies inside his burger. She felt insulted when he offered her a can of sweet black soda. They began bickering like an old married couple over the strange liquid. The soda spilled, and the bubbling foam terrified her like it was poison. She pinned him down, her eyes blazing with ancient warrior rage. To prove it was safe, he chugged the drink himself while she watched closely. After chugging the soda to prove it wasn't poison, Shu Qing finally exhaled a long breath of exhaustion. He looked at the sharp blade in the girl's hand and realized he couldn't just throw her out into the rain. 3 options flashed through his mind: leave her to freeze, call the police, or keep an eye on her himself. Calling the police seemed like a recipe for a bloodbath given her lethal sword skills and jumpy nature. He finally pointed a finger at the floor and told her she could stay, but only under his strict conditions. Rule number 1 was absolute: the sword had to stay in its sheath unless there was a real monster to fight. Jiang Hai looked at the flat brick in his hand and asked if his voice box was a spirit trap. He laughed and explained it was just a tool for talking to people far away, not black magic. To his shock, she mentioned her era was the 16th year of Kaiyuan, making her over 1,000 years old. He realized then that everything she knew, her emperor, her clan, her home, was now dust and history. He told her that for now, this apartment was the only safe place for a girl without a name in the system. He warned her never to leave the building alone until she understood how the metal carriages outside worked. Jiang Hai asked if the horses inside the carriages were very small to fit in such metal boxes. Shu Qing struggled to explain internal combustion and settled on calling it mechanical power for now. The smell of the burger on the table finally broke her warrior-like resolve as her stomach growled loudly. He handed her the wrap and told her it was local cuisine, hoping her ancient stomach could handle it. She took a tiny bite, her eyes lighting up as if she had just tasted the emperor's finest banquet. Seeing her eat, Shu Qing felt a strange sense of responsibility for this lost soul. She suddenly stood and bowed deeply, thanking the young warrior for his hospitality. Shu Qing told her to stop calling him that, as he was just a struggling graduate student. She asked what a graduate student was, and he realized his explanations were only making things worse. He led her to the bathroom and explained the concept of a shower, which she viewed with extreme suspicion. He told her specifically not to slice the shower curtain, no matter how much it moved. While she bathed, he sat in the hallway, listening to the sound of water and the occasional eep of surprise. He realized he had no women's clothes and had to settle on giving her an oversized t-shirt and shorts. When she emerged, the modern clothes looked absurdly large on her small, delicate frame. She complained that the fabric was thin and shameless, making Shuqing cough in embarrassment. It was long past midnight, and he showed her the small guest room filled with his old boxes. He laid out a futon on the floor and told her it was her territory for now. She clutched her sheathed sword even as she sat on the soft bedding, refusing to let go. Shuqing wished her a good night and closed the door, feeling the weight of the day. He lay in his own bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering if he had just invited a ghost into his life. The next morning he woke up to find her standing over his bed with her sword drawn. She demanded to know why a giant sun was trapped in the wall, pointing to the ceiling light he had left on. He realized that rule number 1 was going to be very hard for her to follow. He sat her down and explained that in this world, problems are solved with money and law, not steel. Jiang Hai pulled out 2 pieces of broken silver from her sleeve and asked if they would buy his life. Shuqing stared at the genuine Tang Dynasty silver, realizing she was wealthier than he was in a way. Suddenly, a loud, aggressive pounding echoed from the front door, making Jiang Hai leap into a combat stance. Shuqing's heart stopped when he heard his father's gruff voice shouting from the other side of the wood. He grabbed her shoulders and whispered that she had to hide, or they would both be in serious trouble. As the door handle began to turn from the outside, Shuqing realized he hadn't locked it after the rain. Shuqing lunged toward the door just as it began to creak open. He breathed a sigh of relief when he realized it was only the delivery man dropping off a package next door. He turned back to see Jiang Hai crouching in the corner, holding a kitchen spatula like a sword. The sight of the legendary disciple threatening a piece of cookware was almost too much for him to handle. He gently explained that the danger had passed and it was time for her to clean up. Jiang Hai looked at her dirt-streaked silk robes and wondered how one could bathe without a wooden tub. Shuqing led her to the bathroom and pointed toward the glass-enclosed shower stall. She jumped back as he turned the handle and water suddenly cascaded from the ceiling like a waterfall. "Is this some form of high-level water magic from your sect?" she asked with genuine awe. "No, it is just plumbing," he replied while searching his closet for something she could wear. He pulled out an oversized white t-shirt and a pair of drawstring sweatpants. He handed the clothes through the door crack, trying his best not to look at her. Inside the bathroom, Jiang Hai stared at the bottle of jasmine-scented body wash. The rich lather reminded her of the spring blossoms in the palace gardens back home. For a few minutes, the sound of the falling water washed away her fear of this strange new world. Meanwhile, Shuqing was frantically scrolling through a food delivery app. He wondered if a girl from the Tang Dynasty would even be able to digest spicy fried chicken. He settled on a variety of dumplings and a mild beef, stir-fry to be safe. A loud thud came from the bathroom, followed by a muffled shriek of frustration. "Are you all right in there?" he shouted through the wooden panel. "I have defeated the water monster, but these modern trousers are a puzzle of many ropes," she replied. He realized she was probably struggling with the drawstring and the elastic waistband. When she finally stepped out, the oversized t-shirt hung down to her knees like a dress. Her damp hair was draped over her shoulders, making her look much smaller and more fragile than before. Shuqing cleared his throat and led her toward the kitchen table. Just then, the doorbell rang with a sharp electronic chime. "Is that another of your metal-voiced enemies?" she whispered while gripping a chair. "It is just the food delivery. I promise there is nothing to fear." He returned with several plastic bags that smelled like ginger and soy sauce. Jiang Hai stared at the plastic containers as if they were alien artifacts. "You keep your banquets inside these transparent stones?" she asked with a tilted head. "It is just plastic," he said as he popped the lid off, releasing a cloud of steam. The scent of the food finally overcame her suspicion as her stomach let out a loud growl. Her face turned a bright shade of crimson that matched the embroidery on her discarded robes. Shuqing handed her a pair of wooden chopsticks, something familiar at last. Her eyes lit up as she took them, feeling a small connection to her own world. She took a bite of a pork dumpling and her eyes widened in pure delight. "This is far superior to the hard rations we eat during cultivation training," she managed to say through a full mouth. They spent the next hour eating together, the barrier between their centuries slowly melting away. Shuqing began to ask her about how she ended up in his bathtub in the first place. Her expression darkened as she spoke of a forbidden scroll and a ritual gone wrong. I was being chased by those who wanted the power of the void, she whispered. If I have crossed into this world, then they might be able to find me here too. Suddenly the lights in the apartment flickered and died, plunging them into total darkness. Stay behind me, she commanded, as a strange blue glow began to emanate from her fingertips. Shuqing watched the blue sparks fade from Jiang Hai's fingertips as she stood protectively in front of him. It was only a flickering light bulb, but her warrior instincts were still tuned to a world of assassins. He realized then that keeping a girl from the Tang Dynasty secret was more than just a matter of food and clothes. She had no ID, no passport, and no record of ever existing in this century. If the authorities found her, they would treat her as a spy or a person without a home. Shuqing paced back and forth across the small apartment floor. He needed to talk to someone who understood the law, but someone he could trust with his life. He dialed the number of his old high school friend Li, who had recently joined the police force. The phone rang 3 times before a deep, authoritative voice answered. Li agreed to meet for coffee the next morning at a small cafe near the station. That night, Shuqing barely slept, imagining the police knocking down his door. Jiang Hai sat on the floor, meditating in the silence of the moonlight. The sun rose over the city, signaling the start of a very dangerous day. Shuqing told Jiang Hai to stay inside and not to open the door for anyone. "Why must I hide like a thief in the night?" she asked with a furrowed brow. "Because the world today is governed by papers and numbers," he explained gently. He arrived at the cafe and saw Li sitting in a booth, his uniform looking incredibly official. Shuqing felt like a criminal just by sitting down across from his friend. "Long time no see, Shu," Li barked, patting him on the shoulder with heavy force. Shuqing took a deep breath and began to tell a carefully crafted lie. He mentioned a distant relative who had arrived from a remote village without any papers. Li leaned back, his eyes narrowing in that way that made suspects confess. "That's a major legal headache," Li said, tapping his pen on the table. "The system doesn't like people who don't exist," he continued, his tone turning professional. Shuqing's heart hammered against his ribs as he realized he was getting nowhere. "Is this relative a girl?" Li asked suddenly, a smirk playing on his lips. Shuqing nearly choked on his coffee, his face turning bright red. "You were always a terrible liar, Shuqing," Li laughed, shaking his head. "But listen, if she's really undocumented, the immigration office will deport her immediately." Deport her where? Shuqing thought, knowing there was no Tang Dynasty to return to. Li sighed and pulled out a business card for a lawyer who specialized in difficult cases. "Don't tell him I sent you, but he might know how to find a loophole," Li whispered. Shuqing gripped the card as if it were a lifeline in a stormy sea. As he left the cafe, he saw a police cruiser parked near his apartment complex. Panic surged through him as he began to run toward his building. He burst through the door of his apartment, gasping for air. Jiang Hai was not in the living room where he had left her.
"Jiang, hi!"
he shouted, his voice cracking with terror. He heard a strange scratching sound coming from the balcony. He slowly approached the glass door, his hand trembling. Jiang Hai was standing on the railing, looking down at the street below. "Get down from there," he yelled, rushing toward her. "The men in the blue car were looking for me," she said, her voice eerily steady. Shuqing looked down and saw a group of officers entering the building foyer. "We have to go, right now," he whispered, pulling her back into the room. A loud, rhythmic pounding echoed from the front door of the apartment. "Open up, police," a voice boomed from the other side. Jiang Hai reached into her sleeve and pulled out a small, sharp dagger. "No weapons," Shuqing hissed, his mind racing for an escape route. Suddenly, the business card in his pocket began to vibrate with a faint, ghostly warmth. He pulled the card out, only to see the ink shifting like smoke across the paper. Shaking off the strange sensation, he realized he needed to focus on the task of helping Jiang Hai adapt to this era. He decided that the best way to help her was to start with the basics of modern daily life. The next morning, he told Jiang Hai that they were going on a shopping trip to get her some proper clothes. Jiang Hai clutched her ancient robes tightly, feeling a mix of apprehension and wonder at the thought of leaving the house. Before they left, Shuqing handed her a mask to help her blend in with the locals. As they stepped onto the street, Jiang Hai stared at the towering skyscrapers as if they were mountains made of glass. She flinched as a colorful scooter buzzed past them, thinking it was a mechanical beast. Shu Qing chuckled and explained that it was just a modern carriage powered by electricity. They reached the bus stop, and Zhang Hai watched the large metallic vehicle approach with suspicion. Shu Qing showed her how to use a transportation card, tapping it against the sensor with a beep. The sound of the beep made Zhang Hai jump, but she mimicked his action with wide-eyed focus. They sat by the window and she watched the city blur past like a fast-moving painting. She noted how smooth the roads were, far different from the muddy paths of her home. At the shopping mall, the sheer variety of colors and fabrics left her momentarily speechless. Shu Qing picked out a light blue dress and suggested she try it on. She took the dress to the fitting room, struggling with the zippers and buttons she had never seen before. When she finally emerged, Shu Qing felt his heart skip a beat at how well she suited modern attire. She looked at herself in the full-length mirror, barely recognizing the girl looking back. They bought several outfits and headed to a small cafe for a rest. Zhang Hai watched a couple at the next table holding hands, her brow furrowing in thought. She asked Shu Qing what a girlfriend was, having heard the term several times that day. Shu Qing choked on his drink, his face turning a bright shade of red as he searched for an answer. He explained that it was a special kind of female friend that a man cared for deeply. Zhang Hai pondered this, wondering if her relationship with Shu Qing would ever be described that way. As the sun began to set, they walked toward a nearby park to see the city lights. Zhang Hai was captivated by the street lamps that illuminated the paths like artificial stars. She remarked that this world was truly prosperous, even if it lacked the familiar spirits of her time. Shu Qing felt a surge of protectiveness, promising her that he would always be there to guide her. He then teased her about her mining work in the video game, calling her a pro gamer. Zhang Hai vowed to become the best gamer to repay all her debts to him. They returned home, the apartment feeling more like a shared sanctuary than just a house. Shu Qing noticed Zhang Hai staring at the small ginger sprout on the windowsill. She whispered that life in any era was like that sprout, fragile but capable of growing anywhere. They sat on the sofa together, watching a quiet movie until Zhang Hai drifted off to sleep. Shu Qing carefully draped a blanket over her, his heart full of complex emotions. As he turned to leave, he noticed the business card on the table glowing again, brighter than before. He picked it up and saw a message appearing on the back in ancient calligraphy. The message warned that a shadow from the Tang Dynasty had finally crossed the threshold into the present. Suddenly, a heavy thud sounded from the storage room where Zhang Hai kept her sword. A cold breeze swept through the apartment, even though all the windows were shut tight. He reached for the door handle, his hand trembling as he felt a presence waiting on the other side. From behind the door, he heard a low, metallic scraping sound, the sound of a blade being drawn. He realized with a jolt that they were no longer alone in the safety of their home. The winter air outside was biting, but the apartment felt like a sanctuary of warmth. Red New Year's couplets were now pasted neatly around the doorframe, signaling a fresh start. Zhang Hai stood before the mirror, wearing the new winter dress Shu Qing had carefully selected for her. She noticed how her hair, now professionally trimmed, framed her face in a way that felt entirely new. In the kitchen, the scent of simmering pork ribs and fresh dumplings filled the air. Shu Qing sat at his desk, finishing the final edits on his most important video yet. He looked at the savings displayed on his screen, thinking of the life he wanted to build with her. Winter Melon the cat wove between his legs, purring loudly for attention. The visit to his parents' house earlier that day had gone better than he ever expected. His mother had smiled as Zhang Hai expertly pinched the edges of the dumplings. Even his stern father had been momentarily silenced by her polite and mysterious nature. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, the atmosphere in the apartment shifted. Zhang Hai emerged from the kitchen with 2 bowls of soup, her face slightly flushed from the heat. They sat together on the sofa, the TV broadcasting the New Year's Eve special. Zhang Hai looked at her hands, then at the man who had changed her world completely. She suddenly stood up and walked to the kitchen, returning with a bottle of cooking wine. Before Shu Qing could stop her, she took several quick gulps of the strong liquid. The alcohol hit her quickly, and the cautious distance she usually maintained vanished. She stepped toward him, her movements fluid and powerful like a dancer. With a sudden burst of strength, she pinned him against the sofa cushions. On the TV, the crowd began the final countdown to the new year. As the world celebrated 0, Zhang Hai leaned down and kissed him. It was a moment where 1,000 years of history finally converged into a single point of light. She pulled back, her face hidden in the shadows as she whispered about their clear conscience. Shuqing laughed softly, the tension of the past few months finally melting away. He realized that she was no longer a guest from the past, but the partner of his future. The next morning, the first sun of the new year rose over the snowy city. They walked through the neighborhood together, their breath visible in the cold morning air. Shuqing teased her about her assault the night before, making her blush again. But his tone turned gentle as he promised to wait for her to truly learn to smile. Zhang Hai realized that in this world, she didn't need to be a warrior or a disciple. She only needed to be the person who walked beside him. They spent the afternoon helping Auntie Chung clear the snow from her walkway. The community was already starting to treat them like a young married couple. Back inside, they shared a bowl of hot ginger tea to warm their souls. The ginger sprout they had planted was already starting to show new life. Shuqing showed her a new website where she could share her martial arts knowledge safely. They laughed together as Wintermelon tried to pounce on the cursor on the screen. As evening fell again, they sat on the sofa, watching the stars through the window. The journey from the Tang Dynasty was finally complete, for she had found her home.